Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to extend to all of you all a very warm welcome on behalf of the Georgia Public Library Service, Colorado State Library of Iowa, and Maryland State Library to say how grateful we are to our speakers and to everyone that's listening in today. We have partnered together to offer the first ever multi-state library conference. At the end of today's conference, you will receive a survey. Look for the survey in your inbox. The last page of the survey will serve as your certificate of attendance. And for more information or questions regarding that, please contact your local CE coordinator. Once again, thank you all for attending today's sessions, and I hope that you enjoy. I will turn this over to our first session's host, Nini.
Hi, everyone. This is Nini Began. Hello, this is Nini Began. Welcome to the Multi-State Virtual Library Conference. I'll be your host for this session, which features roles librarians can play in advancing a more peaceful and informed society from our keynote speaker, Dr. Clara Chu. This event is supported through funding from the Colorado State Library, the Georgia Public Library Service, the State Library of Iowa, the Maryland State Library, and the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Before we get started, I have a few things to share with you. This session will be recorded and archived. A link will be sent out next week with access to the archived session. If there are other people watching this webinar with you, we'd love to hear about it so that we can have an accurate head count for our records. Please make note of your additional people so we can get it from you later. You'll have an opportunity to submit text questions for our presenters. Just type them into the Q&A panel. You will receive CEUs for this session and our other sessions today, so look for the survey link in your inbox on Friday. And now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Clara Chu, Director of the Mortensen Center for International Library Programs and Mortensen Distinguished Professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Chu's research focuses on understanding the library and information needs, uses and barriers faced by multicultural communities, and how they can shape information practices and institutions in the provision of equitable information access and foster social change. Thanks so much for being with us, Dr. Chu. We really appreciate it, and we're so excited to have you.
The four state library units that have worked together to bring this first unique conference of its kind, those who are from Colorado, Georgia, Iowa, and Maryland. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I also wanted to do personal thank yous to Nini Began and Dorcas Davis for all the support that they provided, organization and technical support respectively. So I wanted to spend the next about 50 minutes with you. I'll be leaving some time for some questions and answers. And what I wanted to do is to start to share with you some ideas for libraries for peace and social justice. And this work comes about because of the mission of our center, the Mortensen Center for International Library Programs, which is a center that trains librarians and others who are interested in enhancing their library skills. They are usually librarians from other parts of the world that come to the U.S. to train, or we go out to other countries to train them. And so what I wanted to share with you today is some of the work and some of the ideas that we have around how libraries can advance peace and social justice. So during this presentation, I'll be focusing on the following aims. One is to explore libraries and librarians as peace builders and the skills that they might need to do this kind of work, peace building, and also to help create consciousness about librarians' possibilities and impact in building healthy and just communities. So what is it that we can do to build peace or what are we already doing? Because what you'll see is that you'll begin to recognize that there are some things that we are already doing. So when we talk about peace, oftentimes people have different ideas of what that is. So I thought as I'm talking a little bit about this and as an opportunity to share, if some of you are online, if you wanted to share on the Padlet, which is the address librariesforpeace.org/perspectives, then you might type what you think your definition of peace is, or how do you know peace when you see it. And for those of you who want to share, I invite you to type what you think peace is, or how you might define it, or what it might look like. And if you have some images or other multimedia that you want to share with other librarians, you can add that to the Padlet. And so the Padlet allows you to share some ideas that you already have or some work that you're doing online, and that will be shared with librarians all over the world. So as we're thinking about peace, all of us might think of it in terms of the absence of war, but there are other ways to think about it. And so we want to be able to explore this a little bit. So as some of you are typing, if you want to share, we'll just continue and move forward with the presentation. And so don't hesitate, as I said, during any time of the presentation, if you have your particular ideas of what peace is, then to share that with all of us. So one thing that we have seen in our media is an image that looks very similar to the bottom of your screen. And that is the situation that we encountered where there was a protest this past Sunday in Charlottesville, Virginia, and one particular individual decided that they wanted to stop the protest, and they drove a car which killed and injured others. And so a very similar situation of people marching to address their particular concerns is what you see above, which is a march in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, after there were, not just in Ferguson, but in many other places, the shooting of young Black men by police. And so if I were to now ask you what is peace, one of the considerations is your definition any different? Is your definition different when you are in the midst of difficult times, in the midst of conflict, in the midst of chaos? Is that answer different from when you're sitting at home, maybe having a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and enjoying some music? And so these are all different ways that we can consider peace in different moments in our lives, and to think about them in terms of where does the library fit in. And so when we're thinking about peace, we can look towards UNESCO, so the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They have in their constitution the following part of a phrase that is part of their constitution and therefore drives their mission. And that is, and I quote, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men and or women that the defenses of peace must be constructed. And so it really puts the onus on us as the community of the world that the conflicts that we have created them, so it's up to us to share in the solution. And so when we're thinking about peace, then one of the things that libraries can be part of is to promote and enhance a culture of peace and nonviolence. And that would mean a commitment to peace building, mediation, conflict prevention and resolution, peace education, education for nonviolence, tolerance, acceptance, mutual respect, intercultural and interfaith dialogue, and reconciliation. So as you're hearing each one of these words, are there things that you're already doing, or are there things that you might be doing to create or enhance a culture of peace and nonviolence in your particular community? So now I'd like to go from a definition of what peace is or a culture of peace, and also to think about how we might be able to create and enhance it in libraries and by librarians. So the concept and the definition that I like to use is one from the Dalai Lama. And he states, peace does not mean an absence of conflict. So it's not just a matter of not having conflicts, but it's because difference will still be there. They still remain. So therefore, he states, peace means solving these differences through peaceful means, through dialogue, education, knowledge, and through humane ways. And so just because we don't outwardly see conflict, it doesn't mean that conflict might not exist, because when we harbor a notion that we are different and that difference means we may be worse or better than others, then it's a situation where it creates a separation, it creates a barrier between people communicating, respecting, and understanding each other. So the emphasis is, can libraries, through peaceful means, create an environment for dialogue, education, knowledge, and through humane ways? So we can think respectively in terms of dialogue through space that we offer, dialogue through the communication channels and technology that we have, education through our programs and our collections, as well as knowledge we have when we're dealing with our community. So there we go. So we're thinking about two particular aspects of peace. One would be conflict. And so we can examine within each of our communities and ask ourselves some of the following questions, and then consider some of the potential solutions. We might, conflicts exist in your community or in our community, and what exists globally. Because one of the things that we can do is, if there isn't conflict in our community that you recognize, there may be other conflict that we can learn about and experience globally. And so the question is, do you look for particular information about existing conflicts and whether they're locally or not? And so one way would be through media, but also zone in on areas where there might be personal conflicts, whether it's in homes where maybe individuals may be experiencing lack of respect, lack of access to resources, where there may be individuals that are experiencing violence, battering in the home. And so it's not just to look for those big stories of external experiences or external conditions of conflict, but also to look at what may be personal. Oh, okay. I'm hearing that things are breaking up, and so I'm not sure what I might be able to do more. Is that getting any better? So I'll continue. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So one of the things that we can then begin to do is, if we are experiencing conflict, to not shy away from it, to bring it into the library in terms of conversation. One of the best things that we can do is, if we start that conversation where we can begin to increase understanding and different perspectives, then that becomes a way that we can really impact and reduce any particular hate or misunderstanding that can take place. And the library is a recognized safe place in many communities. And so the library would be a wonderful place to start and to have those community conversations and encounters. And also, libraries don't need to do this by themselves. There are other resources in the community, whether that community be a public library community, an academic library community, special library communities. We all can look to others for partnering to do the work of enhancing understanding, creating ways that we can learn more about others, in that way learn about ourselves and have safe spaces for that dialogue and learning to happen. So we will move to something else which is not external or something that's quite visible in terms of conflict, but to look at something that's more internal. So peace is also recognized as quiet or tranquility. And so what can the library do towards that? So one thing that we can do is to advance not just inner peace, but an ethic of caring and community peace and wellness. So the way that we might do that is by offering also, again, information and a space. We can offer yoga classes, opportunities for people to experience a moment of reflection. I have seen in academic libraries at the Illinois at the university. Oh, I'm going blank on the name of the university, but one of the universities, Northern Illinois University, that's what it is, NIU. It has a reflection room in its library. And the reason that it has a reflection room is sometimes people just need a quiet moment and a place to be, or it's also a place where some of the Muslim communities are going and using it as a room for prayer. And so it can serve various functions, and this is an opportunity where libraries can recognize different needs in terms of not just quiet place to study, but a quiet place to also reflect and just have a sense of being focused on mindfulness or meditation. And also part of quiet and tranquility is also an opportunity for libraries to learn how we can create healthy communities. So healthy communities meaning in terms of mental health as well as physical health. So there are both ways that libraries can help in terms of conflict and understand it, and in terms of quiet and tranquility. So how are libraries responding? So I wanted to share the example of the Ferguson Municipal Public Library after the shooting of Michael Brown in Missouri, Ferguson, Missouri. Then there was the grand jury that was held and a decision not to indict the police officer. So at this time, then libraries were able to, or this particular library, by the leadership of Scott Bonner, he was able to keep his library open while schools were closed because of the concern of the protests. And then also through his library, he was able to create a healing kit. And these healing kits were provided and accessible to children and caretakers, where there were books that dealt with healing. There was a stuffed animal and other materials. And there was also a lot of support coming from the community, where there was a fund that was started and more than $350,000 were raised. So Ferguson could provide, the public library could provide the services that Scott Bonner's community had a need to address and support its community. Along with some of this work, then librarians also have created this particular website, Libraries for Black Lives, to be able to support the movement Black Lives Matter. And so this is the way that libraries are doing work in alignment, where they are creating those spaces for discussion of what librarians are feeling about what is taking place, and also how they can help their communities. So now I wanted to move to the work that we're doing at the Mortensen Center. As I indicated, we have been doing this work on Libraries for Peace because in our mission, it is that libraries and librarians can enhance international education, understanding, and more specifically, peace. And so with this Libraries for Peace initiative, it has many aspects to it. And so I wanted to share that this is a place where there are resources, a place to get ideas on action, and a place to celebrate International Day of Peace. So let me share a little bit what the approach is. The approach is that this platform allows individuals that are working in libraries or stakeholders of libraries or friends of libraries to be able to find ideas and share what they're already doing. And this particular approach is one where anyone in the world can participate because we are using a concept that's called collective impact. With collective impact, then this is a strategy that two Stanford professors developed where they consider that if organizations are working together, then we can solve the world's biggest problems, such as poverty, the environment, a healthier environment, and so forth. And so when we work as separate organizations, then we may coexist or we compete. And in that way, then we're not using our knowledge, our collective knowledge, and our resources. And so what they are proposing is that if we can work together, then we can create a stronger impact. When we start as different organizations to communicate, then we're starting to understand that we can create a network with information sharing. We have different expertise. We have different resources that we can begin to learn and maybe start to tap into. Then from there, you move on to cooperating, coordinating, collaborating. And then at some point, organizations feel that they are actually doing similar things and can actually create a program using their same talents and pooling them together. And so different talents to pull into a program of shared mission. And so by integrating, organizations have built trust. They are well connected, and it's no longer a place where we are distinct organizations and have our own turf. And so working together does take time, but one of the things that we find is that if we put the time into it, we get to know each other and we learn to pool resources and to gain trust. And so libraries are already using this approach of collective impact. If you type collective impact in libraries, you will see many examples. I'm sharing just one, which is the Baskerville Partnership. And through this partnership, then 10 community-based organizations, including the library, are helping to transform library services to enhance the possibility of individuals in Baskerville that are unemployed or seek better jobs. And so through the approach of 10 organizations together, they're able to tap into the different resources and be able to refer individuals to each other organizations and recognize that if they do this, then the users in the community have greater access to the different resources of the diverse organizations and city agencies. So they come up with a common agenda of how they can work together and share information about each other's services. And the Baskerville Library has been able to leverage the experience that they have, and now they have an IMLS grant to expand the work that they originally started a couple years ago. And so with peace, one of the things that we're trying to do is to enhance and create better and healthier communities. And the way that we do that is if we ensure that there is social justice. And so social justice, as defined by the National Association of Social Workers, they are looking at a community or a society where everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. And so I wanted to make a distinction between what is considered equality and what is considered to be equity. And so one of the things that we can see is if we give everybody the same resources, that means we give equal resources to everyone, then we look to the left and we find that maybe somebody already has resources. They're trying to look out over the fence. And so they really don't need that particular resource that's been given to them, while the person who you can see is shorter might need more resources. So to ensure equality, then our approach needs to be one that is equitable, meaning that to ensure that everybody has equal access, then it's not a matter of equally distributing the same resources, but to ensure that the resources are provided in an equitable manner. And so everyone does have equal opportunities and equal rights. And therefore, one of the things that is challenging is how do we distribute resources and recognize what one already has to be able to be equitable that leads then to equality. So that's something of a challenge for librarians because does everybody get the same number of books and do they loan them out for the same number of days, and do we allow for the renewal of books in the same way? And so one of is that some libraries, depending on the type of user, are allowing different ways in terms of access to our resources. Another concept that we can use, and one that I like to propose, is contributive justice. So when we're thinking about social justice, it's not the challenge of how do we distribute in an equitable manner so there is equality, but it is a concept that Paul Gomberg came up with, and that is that he focuses not on the benefits that people receive, like who is going to get what or how it's going to be distributed, but he focuses on justice being achieved when one gives to others. That means that if we all have the duty and opportunity to contribute, that means that there will be enough resources for all. And so this is a particular approach that I feel will work well, because instead of holding back and not providing because you think that you might not be distributing enough or distributing too much, then that if we all participate in our libraries and contribute to our communities, if we contribute less, then that's the best that we can contribute. But if we contribute more, then that's also welcome in all situations. So whatever we can contribute, that is the contribution that's appropriate from our particular libraries. So to give additional examples of what we're doing in the U.S. Regarding libraries and peace, one of the things we can do is we can get active in our local professional association and see what we might do collectively with other librarians. We can look at the ALA Library Bill of Rights and to look at how we can enhance the access and freedom to information. And so there is a lot of information coming from the American Library Association about freedom of information and equitable access to information. Then continuing to think locally, there are examples, if you look at our Libraries for Peace website, of particular activities, services that you can provide. This one example is of a reading list on unity and justice that's for youth. And so this is something that you can take advantage of and don't have to duplicate or try to create on your own. Then, as I indicated earlier, we also encourage libraries to celebrate International Day of Peace, and this is coming up on September 21st. And if you go to our librariesforpeace.org website, you'll see more examples. And then specifically this year, then we are encouraging libraries to participate in supporting refugee and immigrant integration and resettlement. And in this particular case, it is aligned with this year's United Nations celebration for International Day of Peace. The theme this year is Together for Peace, Respect, Safety, and Dignity for All. As we know, refugees are in a precarious situation as they're trying to find freedom and security, and many who are seeking asylum don't necessarily have a safe place to go, and it takes years and many years sometimes to be able to place them in a particular country by the United Nations. And so for someone to go from asylum seeker status to refugee status and to be potentially placed in the US or Canada or another safe country, it can take a long time. And so that's something that we may not be aware of, but information through our some of our activities through Libraries for Peace, and I'll share with you in a second our Project Welcome, then you'll be able to gather resources. So to celebrate International Day of Peace, we would like to encourage you to visit the Libraries for Peace website where you can share your celebrations. By sharing your celebrations, libraries around the world can learn from what you're doing, and also anyone who is interested in attending your events can find those events. We are sharing in an announcement that we made recently to encourage librarians to celebrate peace, 3 ways that you can do so, and that's through dialogue, through working on particular projects, and as well as to integrate peace into your programs. And if you are in library and information science education, to integrate that into the curriculum, or as teachers to integrate that into the curriculum. And then the United Nations is promoting 3 ways that the individuals or institutions around the world can celebrate peace. And so that is a minute of silence on September 21st, to welcoming and helping refugees, to also participating in a student video conference on September 15th. So as I indicated, there are a lot more other ideas in the Libraries for Peace website. Then I also wanted to share this particular project. The University of Alberta in Canada, students in a particular class, they decided that they wanted to learn more about Libraries for Peace and to also develop resources that they could leave for other students. So then students could also be considering how in the LIS field, and as they are studying to become library and information professionals, they can also be learning and enhancing peace through libraries and other cultural heritage institutions. So you have the URL there. Okay, so when you go to librariesforpeace.org, you'll be able to also identify some of our other activities, and I wanted to share some of those. So one is Project Welcome, and Project Welcome is an IMLS supported activity. So we have a grant that we are collaborating and doing the activities with the American Library Association. We have been holding discussion sessions to learn from librarians what it is that they're already doing, what challenges are they experiencing in serving refugees and asylum seekers, and what is it that they are missing in terms of knowledge or skills in being able to better serve refugees and asylum seekers. And so we are in the 2nd year of our grant, and we will be coming with recommendations and an action agenda when we are finished with this grant. Also, at the last American Library Association conference, we were also able to share the Public Library Services Guide that we've developed to get input. And so we will also be publishing a Public Library Services Guide. There's a question of whether the slides will be available. And so I think if you wanted to get the slides, we can send you a PDF version of them, as well as you can listen to the recording again as another way to access the slides if you're not able to get them immediately. Our second project is called Community Library Interaction. So Community Library Interaction, or CLIA, is a process where we are inviting libraries to work with their communities, to invite a sector of their community to come to the library and have dialogue. That means that we are supporting community conversations in libraries, and the community conversations are so they can get to know each other, identify collective issues of concern, and then identify what they would like to do about it. So what action would maybe a group of unemployed women like to do? And if they decide to take some action, then is that action leading to social transformation? What would they like to do that could potentially be duplicated and in other communities, or could they change policy or could they change legislation to ensure that there are services to unemployed women, to ensure that their skills are enhanced so that they have increased opportunities to enter the labor force. And so this particular project is going to be offering a clear guide, a guide to hold these community conversations that lead to action and social transformation. The way that we have been doing this is through a co-development process that I will describe in the session later today. And this process is one where we have invited libraries and their communities to come to labs that they are sharing with us their experiences. And then the guide that is developed in this manner will allow libraries to be able to have these conversations. So these conversations are not typical conversations of just getting to know each other the way we might do a coffee chat, but what is it that are issues of concern that we want to be able to work on to ensure that our lives are enhanced as well as there is social transformation. So to continue with what else we offer through Libraries for Peace, in Libraries for Peace, we know that libraries are doing a lot of work to enhance peace, and so there's an opportunity to share your stories, and the way that you would share your stories is to add your story to the map. So all activities such as the sharing of stories, the activities that you are participating or implementing to celebrate peace, as well as any action that you are partaking in. Let's say that you want to become more involved in serving refugees. You want to hold a clear conversation in your community. All these types of actions, you can pledge to do them on the map. And so this means that libraries that are doing work towards peace can all find each other, share concerns, share resources, and learn from each other. So I wanted to leave you with one particular resource, and that is what's called Community Toolbox. And this particular resource is wonderful in terms of working with your community, how you can support your community, and in this way then advance peace. Now I wanted to move us from the local, regional, or national to now looking at peace globally. If we look at the global state of peace and the work that is done through looking at the Global Peace Index, then we find that in 2016, there are two major trends that are continuing. One is that world peace overall is declining, and that there is a gap of the least and most peaceful nations. And so that gap is widening. And so we can have a sense of that through just the news that we might be listening to or watching every day, but some specific data from the index does provide and confirm that particular concern that you might have from watching media. And if we look at the United States, then the Peace Corps for the U.S. is lower in 2016 than it is in 2015. And when we look at the data, then it's largely due to a very high incarceration rate. Okay, so we placed 103 out of 163 countries. Globally, also, we look to the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, and that is IFLA, to give us guidance of activities that we can engage in to advance peace. And one of the initiatives that the organization is involved in is to support and advance the United Nations 2030 Agenda, or some of us might know it as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These goals were agreed upon in 2015, and we have 15 years to reduce poverty, to be able to enhance the quality of education and the 17 areas that have been identified, whether it's related to economic progress, better labor opportunities, and overall peace. And so there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You can see a few of these in an example of what it is that libraries can do in relation to each of these Sustainable Development Goals. If you go to the IFLA website, then you'll find what other countries around the world are doing to advance the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so here you can see that the United Nations is trying to address overall many different areas, and IFLA was involved in the crafting of these, meaning not exactly at the table in terms of the text, but contributing evidence and information that information access, the preservation of cultural heritage, information literacy, and other forms of literacy are areas that are found within each of these development goals. So more specifically, you'll see that in the goal to advance peace, which is number 16, there is reference to access to information. So in terms of what we can do globally to advance peace, we can look again to the U.S. Sustainable Development Goals, celebrating International Peace Day. We can also look to the American Library Association, where there is the International Relations Roundtable group that is trying to share ideas as well as work on the international sustainable library development activities. And then, of course, the International Bill of Human Rights are particular rights that we should be familiar with and try to create awareness around these and share these in our communities. And then lastly, I wanted to share pillars of peace. So we want to make sure that there's a strong foundation for peace in our communities. And the way that that can happen is if we have a well-functioning government, sound business environment, equitable distribution of resources, acceptance of the rights of others, good relations with neighbors, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, and low levels of corruption. So some of us may think, oh, okay, we can help and support free flow of information. But if we take a step back, we can look at each of these areas and be able to bring technology to enhance information flow that will then help to address each of these areas. So in terms of sound business environment, we can support in our libraries independent business owners to be able to have better business practices. So there are ways that libraries can address each of these areas and be a strong foundation to building a stronger, peaceful environment in our community. And so to go back to the Peace Index, if we look at the Peace Index itself, it not only gives information about the United States, but it also brings it down to the level of each state. So if you wanted to look at your particular state, you can do that. And here we have the example of Maryland, and we know from some of the activities taking place in communities in Maryland that there are certain areas of the state that have challenges in terms of violent crime. So the data in this index for the state level is not as recent, and so you may find that things may have improved in your community and it may not be represented because it may not be, for the last year, but it's a good context and some background to give you a comparison across the United States. And then lastly, just to finish off, if we look at what mayors are focusing on to enhance peace at the local level, they have the mayors of U.S. cities have focused on economic development, public safety, budgets, infrastructure, and housing. And again, libraries can provide information to enhance and support each of these areas. And so just to finish up, one of the things that we might want to look to is if we are doing some work to advance peace, how can we measure that and what might be some areas? And so I wanted to share this particular set of indicators. There the International Fragile State Indicators. And so if we look to these indicators, they show us where it is that communities may have some vulnerability. And so these are areas that we can look to and hope to enhance. So with that, I wanted to thank you for considering some of these ideas and also hopefully be thinking of ways that together we can create a more peaceful and sustainable world. So I'm looking forward to any of the questions that you have. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I just want to thank Dr. Chu so much. That was very interesting. I think we're all thinking about that a lot right now. And but I'm going to ask people to please go ahead and put your questions in chat. I can see that we already have one for you, Dr. Chu. Let me find that. William Peak is asking, do you have any idea what sort of policies the Northern Illinois University Library put in place for use of the reflection room?
I don't have that information. I do know that it's been well received. People have been able to see that, oh, okay, I can use it for this purpose or that purpose. So people have found their own use for it, and there haven't been any conflicts as far as I'm aware. And so I think that a policy is critical because if people begin to ask, can I do this or can I do that? When you have a larger library, it's a medium-sized university, and I think that they have maybe closer relations with their users in terms of maybe seeing a lot of the same users that they're able to communicate with. So in terms of a policy, okay, I see that someone found one, so that's great. I didn't have a chance to check it. But policy is always important because people do ask about the extent of use.
Thank you. We're getting a lot of comments in chat about how very informative this has been. I have a couple of questions. One is, what suggestions would you have for us that are hearing this for the first time in terms of being able to take it back and sharing it with people at our library? What are some things? What are some things we can do to kind of get things going?
Okay. So I think that what's important is to look at what one can do through a different taking different directions. So one, of course, is always celebrating. I think people appreciate being able to come together to recognize what it is that they can do and to bring awareness to the issue of peace. And so one would be to find a way to celebrate International Day of Peace. And if you go to the website, there are examples from all over the world. And one example that is being promoted by IFLA is how you can create a book and bring people together of different backgrounds and to use recyclable material to do this. And so there are things that one can do together to bring dialogue as we are creating something. And then there are the very pragmatic things that I think are important and that are creating challenges in people's lives. So when you don't have a job, then that creates tension in your family, and then that tension can lead to conflicts and fights in families. And so to be aware that there are situations in our communities where we want to be able to provide information services, but then look to see if we can bring people who are having these challenges together to start to talk, not just to say, hey, I can help you with, filling out a job application or I have the technology, but what is it that they're experiencing and what makes it difficult for them on a day-to-day experience? So hearing those personal stories that allows them to really work on those issues, not because you have all the answers, but to know that someone is asking them and that if they are talking with others, that they can all help themselves. So I'm going to be talking more about that particular approach later on when we talk about CLIA. But the celebration, the providing information and engaging communities, and then to talk and pragmatic things, the things that are creating challenges in people's lives so they can create not just internal conflict where you don't feel at peace with yourself, but they create conflicts with other people in the community or within a family. And so I would pay attention to all of those things. And then if we are in communities where we already know that there may be conflicts, so maybe in the school, the local school, there are two factions of students or students not getting along, then is there a way that you can have a particular program that talks about these issues, maybe not necessarily for the youth themselves, but maybe we can start with the parents. You know, how do adults feel about this? And all of this impacts the community. So one of the things that I want us all to think about is that these issues don't impact just the people that are involved, but they impact the whole community. And so when we have a community conversation, then is to invite others. So if there are problems at the local school, then is the local parents as well as others in the community. What are the people's concerns? What questions do they have? And how can we help each other understand these issues? And then we can have those separate conversations with the young people and then let them share their experiences.
Thank you so much. That's quite an answer. It's many different things that we can do. And one thing that I find so encouraging about what you share is it helps us recognize first what we're already doing to contribute to peace and social justice, and then helping us think differently about how we can facilitate our community in helping themselves while also being a resource, and then looking at our community needs and seeing what programs we can do in terms of peace. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation this afternoon so we can dig a little deeper. Are there any more questions that people have? You can put them in chat or in Q&A. We have another minute or two. See some really great comments in there about peace.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like what Elisa has said. And that really comes from just an attitude that one has. If people can see that you're welcoming, then that allows others to model that particular approach.
So even just looking at ourselves in terms of peace is a big step.
Mm-hmm. And then I also wanted to highlight Michelle Brandstedter's comment, and that is that when we have freedom in our communities, at least in this country, to not just think about it, take it for granted, but to think about that different people have different ways that they look at the world and the culture that they practice or the religion that they practice. And so it comes down to not thinking, you know, this is the better way, but why is it different and why does it work well for other people, or for them what might be improved because they could learn from us or we could learn from them. And so different, as the Dalai Lama said, is something for us to work to understand, and not necessarily that if we don't talk about them that we're all doing fine.
Thank you. And with that, that brings to mind that if we are able to think about that, then maybe we can also connect that with what you taught us about equity and equality, so that we have a better understanding of where people are coming from and what their needs are and what we can do to meet them.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that there's some comments coming in. Okay, well, let me check the Q&A just to make sure there's no questions in there. And at this point, I want to say thank you, Dr. Chu, for being here today, and thank you everyone for attending and participating in this webinar. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact your state library's continuing education or staff development coordinator. And once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on this presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that with your feedback. Again, the last page of the survey will be a certificate displaying credits earned. Thanks all, and be sure to stay logged in for our next session. And we will have Dr. Chu. Thank you so much for joining us again at 2 o'clock. Up next is our inclusiveness panel that is starting at the top of the hour. So stay tuned, everybody, and we'll get started in a few minutes with that. Thanks again, Dr. Chu.
Thank you. And thank you all for those who contributed your definitions of peace on the website.